We're gonna have to cut this too. But I said something to the tune of like, dude, fucking like handsome black dudes that get adopted are like fucking gonna take over the world. They just kill. They just crush.
Oh man, I appreciate that.
There's these concepts. There's the concept of nihilism. Nothing matters. Why try it? And then there's the concept of absurdism. Nothing matters. Might as well try. St. Louis is. There's Play-Doh here. You know, you have something that you can build, right? There's so many great things. Like, people come to St. Louis to see what they can give to it a lot of times, and I think when you go to other cities, people see what they can take away from other cities.
Man, I think the biggest problem with St. Louis is a marketing problem. Would you agree with that?
I think people are comfortable and they don't even want to see the community is right in front of them if they so choose.
I've got tons of like guy friends who, when I ask them like, hey, like, what are you looking for in a woman? You're like, oh, I want someone who takes care of themselves. I want someone who is, ambitious. I want someone who has standards. And I look at them, I'm like, bro, you don't got none of that. Yeah. There's gonna be a spicy take.
Yes.
Oh man, I don't know if I should say it, man. I don't even know if I want to say it, but fuck it. I think the problem that most men have is
This episode of the Noble Lore podcast is brought to you by Noble Lore. Noble Lore, what do we do? Well, maybe you have a podcast that you already have started and it's only on audio and you want to get past that bottleneck of not really being discoverable. And so we want to switch it over to video. I bring and introduce video to your podcasts, manage it completely, do the distribution, the marketing, and the production. So I take care of everything. You show up and talk. That is Noble Lore.
My name is Izayah Hudnut. I'm the founder of Doors. Doors helps small businesses make more money by automating tasks. So those tasks can either be things that are related to providing value for your business, or they can be things that are stopping you from investing more time and resources to things that actually drive business value. If this is something that's interesting to you, you can go to dor15.com and schedule a free consultation with me.
So I started this podcast really as like a lead generation for my business and also to bring forward good conversations, but really it was mainly just like, hey, I'm trying to get business. I'm desperate. And no, I'm kidding. But now I've really discovered, and you'll hear this over and over again as these podcasts release, that I'm starting to really just enjoy being able to like brag about and show off my friends and the people I'm spending time around. And so the person that I have here today is someone that is just like a fucking go-getter. They just like, I want to do this, and then you don't talk to them for like 2 weeks, and they've done the thing. Whatever it was, they've done it. This is my friend Izayah Hudnut, who we are talking to today. So, without further ado, Izayah Hudnut, welcome to the podcast.
I appreciate you having me, Jack. Oh man, I was so happy when I heard that you're starting the podcast back up, and the fact that I'm, one of the first guests means a lot to me. So, I feel like a proud father, man. In many ways, like you're like my son, so I'm proud of you, man.
No. Hell no. You can't. You are not. I might have to cut that out. You cannot do me like that on my own podcast. All right, welcome to the pod. What about it? What were you thinking about? You're like, yeah, this made me excited. Mm-hmm. What about it made you excited?
Yeah, I mean, it was, it's a lot what you said in the intro. You wanted to start the podcast to show off your friends and the people that influenced you, and I was happy to hear that, I was one of those guys. So, yeah, it meant a lot to me.
Hell yeah. This whole podcast, I'm just going to ask you questions about why I'm awesome, and then I'm just going to have you answer them. Is that cool?
Yeah.
I need more. Yeah. I need a lot of compliments.
That's what we do off camera, by the way, too. So yeah.
We gas each other up big time. Like if I were to gas you up, it's just a laundry list of things that I would.
Yeah, ping pong, pickleball, probably the top two.
Right. He's saying all of these things that I just crush him in. No one beats me in paddle sports. I've said it before. I'll say it again. No one beats me in paddle sports. But yeah, you grew up playing football. You were pretty you're a pretty athletic person, right? Is that
Yeah, I would say it was pretty athletic.
Did that like kind of help you with people and being popular and with the ladies and stuff? Did you see that happen?
Oh yeah, I mean for sure. I think football teaches you so much. I think there's a lot of society that is, pretty subjective and not necessarily like a merit-based activity. And, what my football coach always said, I mean, it's hard to hide on film, once you're on the field, there isn't a lot you can do to, hide the work you didn't put in or you did put in, in the off season. So, you either perform or you don't perform. And, the results are pretty obvious. So, yeah.
That reminds me of the Ice Cube quote, don't be disappointed by the results you didn't get from the work you didn't put in.
Oh, 100%. Yeah.
So you've noticed, would you say you've noticed that in society in general, it's not a meritocracy anymore? Or what are you saying about
yeah, for the most part. I mean, it's easy to, It's easy to fake a lot of stuff. It could be like a sales call. It could be, a first date. It's so easy to fake the person who you are. But, again, like with, contact sport like football, you can't fake, the work you put in the off season. You can't fake, long nights, the early mornings, because that shows up, in your play versus like a lot of life. Your outcomes are decided on factors that necessarily don't have to do with anything that you would contribute. So it's easier to fake it, I guess.
Have you ever seen that? This kind of almost become like a cliche in the business world or in like the self-development world. But have you ever seen those pictures of icebergs? So you've got these
Hmm.
big icebergs on top, and then if you look under the surface, they're like 5 times bigger under the surface than
Yeah,
they are on
yeah.
the top. And so it kind of became a cliche in the self-development world, but it makes a lot of sense of like, this is where all the work is. This is what's allowing this iceberg to float in the first place.
Hmm.
Um, so what are we in right now? Where are we at? This is like we haven't even just mentioned it. It's freaking sick.
Oh man, yeah, we are at St. Louis downtown airport, and a good friend of mine, Josiah's Hangars. He is the founder and owner of St. Louis Flight Training as well as St. Louis Flight Maintenance, and this is the unofficial home of the new Spirit of St. Louis. So we're in a pretty special spot right now.
The Spirit of St. Louis, describe that.
Oh man, it's a fascinating story. And I was ignorant of this story up until like 3 months ago, and I've lived in St. Louis like all my life. So yeah, I mean, essentially the story goes in the 1920, there was this prize called the Orteig Prize, and it was essentially a $25,000 reward for the first person to fly nonstop, solo across the Atlantic Ocean. And this guy named Charles Lindbergh, he ended up winning the prize. But when he was going around raising money, to fund the trip, the pitch essentially was, "Hey, you fund this trip, and if I win the prize, we will share in the profits." And he goes to these, St. Louis bankers at the Racket Club, which is, still there today. And I think the exact room he's like doing this pitch to these bankers is like, still preserved. And he gives the pitch, and these St. Louis bankers had the foresight to understand that if Charles Lindbergh wins this, his name and the name of the plane will be synonymous in aviation history. So they made a deal with them, and they essentially said, "Hey, we'll fund your trip, and if you win, you could keep all the prize money, but in return, you need to call the plane the Spirit of St. Louis." And long story short, he wins the prize. The name Spirit of St. Louis goes down in aviation history. And flash forward to today, St. Louis, one of the most well-known streets is, Lindbergh Boulevard. We have airport named the Spirit of St. Louis. We have a high school named after, Lindbergh, the Lindbergh Flyers.
Bunch of crazy motherfuckers that go there. I'll tell you that much.
Hey, that's you. I'm from St. Charles County, so I don't know too much about that. But yeah, that is the sort of history of the Spirit of St. Louis.
That's amazing. It seems like there was so much courage in that story along multiple different avenues. First of all, the obvious one, the courage to fucking fly a plane across the Atlantic when no one else has done it before. Like, I think about out here, like just the fact that you're getting your pilot's license, and we'll get into that, but I'm just like going up in a little tiny plane, just driving around St. Louis, kind of just like, oh, that takes courage in itself. Right. And then to go out and do something that no one has ever done in a world where so few people have access to it in the first place, right? There's so few pilots at that time, I'm sure, and then even fewer that were even had the cojones to go across the Atlantic.
That's right.
How do you follow courage? I mean, or how do you pursue courage, and what does that look like in your life?
Gosh, man, what you described is so inspiring to me, and it's always been. There's a famous quote that from Walt Disney, and I'm gonna fuck it up, but essentially goes along the lines of, around here, we don't look back for too long. We keep opening new doors because we're curious, and curiosity leads us down at new paths. And I think a lot of the things I'm most proud of in my life, it was hard for me to identify what those outcomes would look like when I started the journey. But looking back on it, it was easy for me to sort of connect the dots. And that's sort of a lesson that's been, reinforced, throughout my journey is, at the beginning, when you're taking a chance, doing something that's like scary, it's going to be hard for you to, imagine what that path is going to look like to get to whatever outcome you do. But I've never regretted going down the path. And whether it be like sports or life or relationships, it somehow seems to always work out.
Huh. Somehow it always seems to work out, and it's so funny because in your mind, like you're saying beforehand, it's like in my mind, I'm thinking about all of the ways that it could go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking about the few ways that it could go right, and I'm not often thinking about that. I'm always thinking about
Right.
what could go wrong. Is that internal dialogue in your head before you do something that requires courage?
Not necessarily, and I think you kind of touched on it with your iceberg analogy. Is most of like your actual experience, and we actually talked about this the other day. Most of the actual experience of doing whatever thing you think is noble or desirable isn't actually has anything to do with like the outcome, right? So if your goal is to have a successful business, very rarely are you going out and like actually like pitching companies or winning that sale or doing all the things that are actually scary. Most of it's like actually putting in the work. So when I decided this is like a risk that's worth taking, I don't necessarily do the math of, is the risk something that I'm not willing to handle? It's more so like, is the everyday experience of pursuing that goal something that, I'm willing to do and willing to, sacrifice my time for?
Say more about that. What do you mean by that exactly?
Yeah. So just to give you the, business example, it's not necessarily that I'm thinking about, oh man, what if I fail? What if I lose my money, etc.? It's, am I willing to spend my nights and weekends working on a project? Am I willing to be curious? Am I willing to wake up in the morning? Am I willing to drive out to go pitch a company? Am I willing to do presentations? Because again, that's like 99% of your the actual experience of like running a business, and the 1% is like actually succeeding or failing.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's amazing. Yeah, so your business, we kind of did the intro on it, but how
Mhm.
did you start that, and like what is it exactly?
Yeah. So what Doors does is we help small businesses make more money through automation. And my automation journey, I started off by solving my own problem actually. And I was in a job, and I got that job, fairly young. So a lot of the work I was doing was like grunt work. And I'm, still, I mean, I'm only 23. And even when we had new hires, I was still always like the youngest person in the company. So a lot of the low level work that didn't necessarily drive any business value was I had the opportunity to do a lot of that work. And yeah, I mean, that's again, when I first got the job, I was like, oh, I'll do anything to fucking work at this company. But as I got older and got more into tech, it's like it started to be something that was taking away from the work I actually wanted to do. So again, I say all that to say, like, I solved my own problem. I didn't want to do any of that work. I wanted to do the work that I thought was creative and gave me energy, and what I thought actually drove business value. But again, I was like the youngest person in the company, so there wasn't anybody I could sort of, delegate that task to. So that's what I got into automation. It was a way for me to sort of delegate the task to a computer instead of, a person. And I ended up solving my own problem, and I, told my story, and other people, found it, valuable and interesting. And I decided that this was something that I wanted to pursue.
Okay, so yeah, so to describe, I think it would be super valuable to have you describe how you started working at the company that you were working at. I don't know
Yeah.
if we want to keep it anonymous or whatever. We can, but yeah, like how did you go about even getting that job in the first place?
Yeah.
Because even that was a first principle thinking. Fuck everything else that I'm told of being a cog and just going along the road. Let me go fucking forge my own path.
Yeah. I'm more than happy to dive deep into that story. So I worked in venture capital, and if you don't know what venture capital is, it's essentially Shark Tank. So if you've ever seen Shark Tank, where people go and they pitch their company and people give them the money, that's what VC is. And I got this job. It's about 19. So I graduated high school, and I didn't want to do college. I didn't have the patience for it. And my first business out of college was I wouldn't even call it a business. It was more of being a consultant. I was building websites for people. And I was making enough money to sort of, scrape by, but I wasn't making enough to have the freedom that I wanted. And on top of that, the reason why I say it wasn't a business was, these clients, weren't repeatable. So I'd build a website for someone, and then I would have to, go find a new client, right? I wasn't making money while I slept. And I knew that I wanted to do business, and I didn't want to go to college, but I also recognized like there was a lot like I had to learn. And I had this sort of like realization that I should get into venture capital. Um, and my thought process behind that was like VC was such a great job because one, you make a lot of money. And two, you're very much investing in founders and getting a front row seat to some of the best entrepreneurs in the world. And for me, that was like, oh, that's like a great learning experience. So flash forward a little bit, I'll come back to how I got the job. But I actually learned that I took the complete opposite career trajectory. Usually VC is like the very last thing you do. So
Why?
so there's like two paths to getting into venture capital. It's one, it's like you work in finance your whole entire career, and then you transition over to VC, or you start a business. You sell that business, you have some sort of exit, and then you get into venture capital. And the reason behind it is the very nature of the business is not only investing in people, so you need a lot of money to do that. But secondly, you're advising people on how to build a great business. So it makes no sense for someone, early in the career to do that.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Yeah. I found this out after getting the job because I was so ignorant to it that.
You weren't burdened by experience.
Yeah, exactly. And I didn't realize like how unusual it was for me to be like so young and, working venture capital until I was actually in it. But going back to actually how I got the job, yeah, like you said, it was like first principle thinking. I was so ignorant to the process of even getting into it. I literally just thought to myself, okay, like where do VCs hang out at? And obviously we live in St. Louis, Missouri, which, as of right now isn't that big of a tech hub. So I was like, okay, I need to be able to connect with these people like remotely. And I found out that a lot of VCs hang out on Twitter. So I ended up downloading Twitter, which is now X, formerly known as Twitter.
Gotta put that in there.
Yeah, put that in there. And I downloaded Twitter, and I just started following people in the tech industry. And I was very ignorant to all of it. And at the time, Twitter had this feature called like following topics. So you could follow like topics like venture capital, technology, computer programming. So I followed all those topics. And one of the recommendations I got within like the first like couple of days was, oh, you should follow this guy named Alexis Ohanian. And I looked at his profile. He had like 500,000 followers. He seemed to post like a shit ton like every day about just like tech and different stuff. So I was like, okay, this guy's probably a cool guy to follow. So that's all the research I did like on this guy, and I followed him. And not even like a week or two later, he makes an announcement that he's starting a new venture capital firm. And he said this is going to be a purely merit-based firm. I don't care where you live. I don't care if you're in San Francisco, and I don't care if you went to college or where you went to college. And as someone living in St. Louis, Missouri with no college degree, this is obviously extremely attractive to me.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Music to your ears, probably.
Yeah, music to my ears. So I was like, okay, like I want to work at this firm. And I did some research on not only Alexis, but the company. And it turns out this guy was the founder of Reddit. And not only that, he invested in some of the, companies that we know today, like, Airbnb, Coinbase, Cruise, self-driving cars. So I'm like, oh, this guy's like heavy hitter. So like that's even like a plus because again, this is like someone else I can learn from. So I go to their website, and the VC firm he's starting is called 776, as in 776 BC. And one of the first things that says that it said on their website is, we are a tech company that deploys venture capital. And for whatever reason, like that was super interesting to me. And I dove a little bit deeper on like what that meant. And I found out that the venture industry was super interesting, and it's not necessarily run on software. It's more of like an email job. So what I mean by that is how VC works is you are emailing people saying, hey, can I invest in your company? And if they agree to that, you are tracking all of your investments in a Google Sheet. So there is no way to be accountable to anybody, really. And VC is such a weird industry in the sense that you are investing in a company, and let's say in 10 years, that company becomes $1 billion company. You are now like vindicated in all of the actions that you took over the last 10 years. So you should be sitting on your ass. And if one of the companies that you invested in turned out to be, $1 billion company, you are somehow, again, like you are somehow like, even though you did absolutely nothing, you were looked at by society as like a winner. And again, you were justified in a lot of the actions that you took, even if they didn't, necessarily generate any sort of value. And Alexis, being in the industry, knew this and decided to take an opposite approach, where it's like, okay, we are going to build like a VC company purely based off software and accountability. And I thought that was so sick. So what I ended up doing is building like a version of the app he was describing, and I sent that over to the team along with like a quick video on like who I am and why I think it'd be a great fit for the company. And flash forward, I think this is like 2 more weeks. So again, the whole entire process of me like downloading Twitter for me like actually getting this job was like less than a month. It was insane. And I get a call from Caitlin Holloway, who's one of the partners at the venture firm, and she goes, "Hey Izayah, we got your video and we got your app, and it's really cool. But we are only hiring financial analysts at this time. But we love your story and we love you. So we are willing to offer you an internship for 3 months. And that 3 month internship turned into 3 years of me working at that company. So,
Amen, baby. Amen. What'd you put in the video? What did your video say?
man, I don't know exactly, but
Man.
I sent them the app, and I made like tried to gamify the app a little bit. So I made this like sort of presentation walking through how to use the app, and I had a theme, and I can't remember exactly what it was. And I had like their company logo on a screen behind me, and I made like a custom T-shirt, and I just, added a little showmanship, to the presentation.
Man, it's such a fucking cool story. It's because there are so many boundaries that we put in our heads of all, like I was saying at the beginning, all the things that we think aren't going to work out. So might as well just not even send that over, right? Like,
Mhm.
well, there's many different questions I want to go down that route, but I imagine that you had a lot of, um, fuck, what's the fucking term? Where you're in something that you don't feel like you're deserving of it.
Mm.
Um,
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome.
Yeah,
God,
yeah.
we're gonna cut all that shit. No, we're not. Imposter, but I imagine that you felt imposter syndrome, you know, in the beginning. Maybe not. Did you? I don't
Oh,
know.
for sure, for sure. I'm a very optimistic guy, so I try to focus on like my unique perspective. I try to turn my weaknesses, to a positive, and I try to provide value whenever I could. But yeah, I definitely felt imposter syndrome.
And then what do you think? So what do you think that they loved the video? What do you think Alexis saw in you that made him like want you to be in his circle?
Yeah, I think agency is such a big thing, and I know we talk about this in our friend group. But you get bonus points like being young, and if there's anyone who's like, a teenager or even like under, I would say 25, if you can show to someone who's older that you are willing to go out and change the world and just do things, it's a huge advantage. And people will judge you based off your potential and how much upside you have, not necessarily like who you are today. And I'd like to think that Alexis saw, a young kid who was, willing to put himself out there and willing to, build cool shit. And I'd imagine that that sort of, separated me from a lot of people who just, were talking about doing stuff.
And so once you were in the company, would you think? Do you think you provided value? Like, did you show up? And
Oh yeah. You know, like I said, I learned after getting the venture capital world that a lot of it is advising, founders on how to run a great company, which, being a 19-year-old kid who's never ran a great company before in his life, that was obviously something that's super hard for me to do. But I think because our firm was so unique in the sense that we were a tech company first, there were tons of value that I think I provided, as well as far as, building the software for them, and then eventually building the automation that, ended up automating my job.
so I'd be curious to, this is the people that are watching this, the fucking millions of people that are watching this. They're seeing like who you are after the success to some degree, and obviously we're still building, but after the success of like figuring yourself out and kind of knowing who you are to some degree. But like, where do you come from? How did you grow up? Because Jake and I were talking on the way over here, and we're gonna have to cut this too. But I said something to the tune of like, dude, fucking like handsome black dudes that get adopted are like fucking gonna take over the world because they just kill, they just crush.
Oh man, I appreciate that, man. You got to tell Jack to keep that same energy when we play ping pong, man. Like he turns into a completely different guy. But yeah, I mean, growing up, we didn't have a lot of money, and yeah, I like you said, I was adopted, so I necessarily didn't feel that connected to my family. And I think a lot of things, growing up, I learned by going out and doing it and finding out who I was at a younger age, rather than, relying on like, my parents or my older brothers or, aunts and uncles, just because I didn't feel like I could relate to them.
You're super independent. Yeah, I've definitely noticed about you. Why do you feel like you couldn't relate to them?
I don't know, man. And, it's hard for me to articulate, but I'd imagine it's much easier to follow someone who looks like you and has the same quirks and interests, um, than, someone who doesn't look like you at all. But again, yeah, I don't know. I don't know.
So okay, so who in your family would you say you're most connected to?
Probably my older brother. We had a, fairly, similar experience growing up. And like you were saying, before we started the podcast, the relationship you have with your sister is someone who is, always keeps you grounded and sort of the anchor in your life. He's my anchor. So I'm probably closest with him in my family.
What about him anchors you?
Man, we're both extremely competitive, so he never lets me get too big and never lets my head get too big. And he always just tells me how it is, man. I think in life, once you start having a little success, people sort of treat you different, treat you nicer, and they don't necessarily tell you what they think. And having someone who is, never gonna, never gonna sugarcoat anything and always push you to be your best. It's yeah, something I'm super grateful for.
That's yeah. So now we can kind of dive into the Parium group, with which I've brought up on almost every episode so far, but we've had this for 2 years, and then we came together and created a group of originally 8 guys, right? Of like all on that level of like, we're not gonna let each other get too big for our britches. We're also gonna hype each other up and help each other as much as we can in their successes. I'd be curious if you talk about Parium and like what it is.
Oh man, yeah. Parium has been so helpful for me. And I think I told you this before, but I was actually gonna move to Las Vegas. I think this was what you said, like two-ish years ago. So I've been working in VC for a little bit. I had enough money that I could pretty much live wherever I wanted, and most of my connections were not in St. Louis. We were a remote company. I was the only person like living not on the coast. We had people from New York, Florida, Seattle, and California, and I was the only person like directly in the center. So I had almost like 0 connections here in St. Louis, and I hadn't fell in love with the city yet. I mostly looked at St. Louis as a burden rather than an opportunity to actually build something. So I was actually planning on moving to Las Vegas. I got accepted for an apartment there. I was about to sign my lease, and a mutual friend of ours was talking about wanting to put a group of 8 guys together, and I should just go to the first meeting and see how it is. And I went to that first meeting, and I walked away not necessarily knowing what the group was, but it felt like we were at the beginning of something. So I canceled my lease and moved out to the city.
You canceled your lease? Well, you're not. Well, saying you moved out to the city.
Out to the county. Sorry. Out to the county. But honestly, to a lot of people in St. Charles County, which is like the county over from St. Louis County, once you cross the Missouri River, you're like in the city, basically.
Out of the damn hills.
Yeah, you're out of the hills and into the city.
What you said you looked at St. Louis like a burden. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, I didn't think it was a place where you could go and follow your dreams and you could find people, like-minded who would support you in those. I think there's like a phrase, it's like tall poppy syndrome. Have you heard of this?
But describe it.
Yeah, I believe there's a plant in Australia called a poppy seed, and for whatever reason, there were like 1 or 2 plants like in this, sort of, garden or whatever. They get taller than all the other plants. So like, to keep them all even, you got to cut them down. And there's usually in smaller cities, especially out in the suburbs, if someone appears to, being, higher than someone else, wanting to do more than what society, expects them to do, people cut them down. And my experience with St. Louis had been this sort of tall poppy syndrome, where I didn't necessarily feel, supported and, having big goals and wanting to do big things.
What did you see that made you, like in your experience, what experiences did you have that led you to that conclusion?
Yeah, I mean, it was like a lack of curiosity.
Yeah, St. Louis is very. St. Louis is also being in the center. It's like if you go to the coast, people are willing to try new ideas, and in St. Louis, it feels like they need to see proof over and over and over again before they're willing to try a new idea.
Yeah, people are less likely to take risks out here. For sure.
Yeah. So how do we fix this? What do we do?
Give
me the answers, Izayah.
Yeah, a lot of work we're doing right now, man. I think it starts with building a culture and a community of innovation, and that's not necessarily with like tech or business. What we're doing, it's it's art, it's entertainment, it's supporting the people who actually want to build these things. I think is like a great first step.
Yeah, dude, what we're doing is fucking cool. I'm not gonna lie.
Yes, sir.
I'm willing to brag about shit nowadays. Like I used to be. I used to think I was more mature because I didn't brag about myself, and I thought I was mystical and mysterious and all this fucking bullshit. But now, you know what? Fuck it, dude. Like, we're doing some cool shit, and we're setting ourselves apart from people. And
man, I think the biggest problem with St. Louis is a marketing problem. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think that's a big problem with it. I mean, there are practical parts of it that are a problem, which is like, you know, the lack of police officers in the city of St. Louis and the fact that we're putting in safety ambassadors to make people quote unquote feel
Mm.
safe. I mean, there's a lot of seems like misuse of money, and part of that misuse is a lack of marketing, I would say. But what makes you say market? It's a lack of marketing.
Yeah, again, it's like I never felt like St. Louis was a place where I could be supported in following my dreams, and part of the reason why was my own experience, but then too, no one was telling me that. Again, I had no experience with Silicon Valley or San Francisco or New York, but it was just known that if you want to do big things, this is the place you need to go. And I think it's marketing, honestly.
Do you think it's geographical? I mean, I get there are places like Nashville and Austin, Texas,
Mhm.
but our geography makes it a challenge. Do you think that's a fair excuse, or should we just say like, nah, buck up,
Man,
buddy?
yeah, I mean, I think that's part of it. People love obviously like the weather in California, but I think if again, I wouldn't necessarily say that's like the main reason because New York has terrible weather. Actually, the lifestyle. Have you been to New York?
Never.
Really?
I'm afraid to go.
The lifestyle in New York is like actually pretty shitty. The weather's terrible. Every place you go is crowded. There's like rats running everywhere. But people love it, right? Because it's a place where you can be supported and whatever avenue you want to pursue.
Really? You can be supported in whatever avenue you want to pursue in New York?
100%. If you're in finance, if you're in tech, if you're in fashion, if you want to be an actor or an actress, there are resources and communities to help you pursue that. And I don't think as of right now there are necessarily hubs here in St. Louis to allow those people to do that.
Huh. So okay, so then it's a marketing issue and it's building hubs of helping people do that. Yeah, the marketing issue is interesting. What would you do if you were to start marketing St. Louis as best you could? What would you be doing to do that?
Honestly, what you're doing right here with this podcast, you talked
Amen.
about like wanting to brag, and I think that's like a great way to do it. Educating people that hey, there are people here doing cool shit, and if you want to do cool shit here as well, we will support you, right? And there are communities that you can belong to that will help you achieve the outcomes you want to achieve.
I'm glad you said that. That's because that's exactly what I want to do with this podcast. I'd love to make it a hub of influencers, as becoming a fucking drawn out word, but a hub of influential people that are
Mhm.
broadcasting their ideas and being thought leaders on different areas of expertise,
Yep.
and then doing that in St. Louis, where it's affordable, one of the most affordable places to live, as far as a large city goes. I mean, it's probably the most affordable city to
Oh
live
yeah.
in.
Yeah.
And like we talk about a lot, St. Louis is there's Play-Doh here. You have something that you can build, right? There's so many great things. Like people come to St. Louis to see what they can give to it a lot of times, and I think when you go to other cities, people see what they can take away from other cities.
Right. You're renting. You're not necessarily like buying a home.
Right.
Yeah. I agree. And honestly, I think it starts not necessarily with getting people to move here, although we're doing a great job of that so far. But it's getting the people who are born here to stay.
Mm.
Right. I always give the example of Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, which is probably like one of the most popular companies out there right now. He's from St. Louis, right? And for whatever reason, he didn't feel like he could build a great company and learn what he wanted to learn here in St. Louis. So how do we build a community where sort of the next Sam Altman feels like he can build his life here?
That's interesting. Yeah, how do we get people to stay in St. Louis? How do we get people hyper successful people to stay in St. Louis? I think is
Hmm.
a good, because it seems like a lot of families gravitate back towards St. Louis. I think like when I think about the community that I grew up in, which was like a tight knit Catholic community, um, it was a lot of people that go off, they venture off, they go to these different schools, whatever, and then they come back and then they
Right.
grow a family here. So I think it's a beautiful place and affordable place to grow a family. But how do we get influential people to come back is a good question as well.
Yeah, people who want to be builders. Yeah, I don't know. Again, I think it's a lot of the work we're doing right now.
Yeah. What is a lot of the work that we're doing right now? Like you said, mentioned that we're hosting events and stuff, but
It's creating community, man. I think a problem with St. Louis is not necessarily we don't have talented people here. We do, but there is no network connecting those nodes together. So, if you are someone who is talented or ambitious, you don't necessarily have a experience of being able to go to a place to connect with like-minded people. Versus, San Francisco, it's so obvious to find those people because, you go to the city and these hubs and these communities are already built out, and you feel like you can find your tribe, fairly easy. where St. Louis is, it's much harder to find your people.
How you go about? I don't know if I want to. I don't know if we want this public, but like, how do you go about filtering out grifters and these like dorks that just show up with a business card and like aren't doing anything?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to it. Yeah, I would imagine it was just having a great filter. I think a lot of communities, their sort of KPI is number of people, attending, their meetings or whatever. And I think that's a terrible KPI to measure because, again, you get a lot of those grifters, a lot of the people who aren't necessarily like builders and, just in it for themselves.
How do you, by what heuristic do you use to filter out the people that you surround yourself with, and specifically like the people that you are closer with?
Yeah, I think agency is one of them. We talked about that, earlier in this podcast. First principle, thinkers is probably the second thing I would filter out.
What is a first principle thinker?
Someone who finds truths like for themselves. I think there's so much societal pressure to think, one thing or another, or live your life one way or another. And it's the people who realize that, like, you don't have to do that, right? You can find truths for yourself. You can believe in what you want to believe. And you can go out and do the research to either, find what is your truth, or do experiments to find what the right way to live to achieve the outcomes you want to achieve. And I think the people who demonstrate that are the people that I want to spend my time with.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. That's how do you go about filtering out who you want romantically in your life?
Oh man. This is the part of the podcast where we get canceled.
All right, let's go.
So I think I have a unique perspective on this. Take this with a grain of salt. I am single, so I wouldn't necessarily, and I'm obviously fairly young, so I don't think this is any ground truth or anything. But I think something I feel fairly passionate about are three things. One, I like, when it comes to a partner, I like women who are beautiful, not only like physically but mentally as well. They know their worth, they have a standard for themselves. They care about how they're perceived in the world. So that's one.
All right, Jake, you can turn the script off that we have over there.
That's one. Two, I think having ambition, and it's not necessarily like ambition in your own life, but obviously we have big goals, and a lot of those goals, it's going to take a lot of work, to accomplish that. Something we want to do is repopulate St. Louis, and that might take our entire lives to do that. And it's something we're going to be dedicating tons of time and resources in. So it's unclear to me that it's unclear to me that I'd be able to find a partner who wouldn't have the same goal as me and be willing to support me as well. So I think that's like the second one. And the last one is, I would say someone who's trustworthy. I think my ideal lifestyle is I don't necessarily care what you do, in your free time or who you're spending your time with. And if you go out to the party, I don't want to track you or have to ask you like, hey, who's going to be there and who you're going to talk to. And I think the only way to do that is by finding someone who's trustworthy. So I'll say those three things.
And do you think it's harder to date now than it used to be, or do you think people are just being pussies?
Man, I don't like the framing of that question. I think it's different for sure. But man, I think I just don't like the framing of that. I think it's definitely different for sure. But people back in the day had their own challenges that they had to overcome.
They had to drive on a horse buggy or ride on a horse to get to their gal and talk.
Well,
to her
not even
once
that.
every
It's just
3
like you
months.
weren't even connected to the whole entire world. So it's like the women that you, again, from a man's perspective, like the women you could partner up with had to be like the women in your community, right? And if you didn't find them in your community, you're kind of fucked. So yeah, I don't like the framing of like harder, but yeah, it's definitely different now.
I love that answer because I think you're exactly right. It's always going to be different.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? In 10 years from now, it's going to be different, and then people are going to be saying it's harder now. It's harder now, dude. And then we, to some degree, people are going to say we have pretty privilege, or maybe that we're chads or whatever. And
Oh
so
yeah, we're definitely getting canceled.
Yo, but like we had like to get to the the bodies that we have and the style that we have and the personality, we had to fucking develop all that shit. I was this skinny little dweeb with braces. I had a faux hawk. I had not a lot of acne, but I just looked like a dork, bro. And
Right.
and like we had to develop this over and over with repetitions, like we've been talking about, repetitions over and over and over again, that iceberg under the water. And then now dating is a lot more I don't know. I wouldn't say yeah, maybe easier for us than like than a lot of guys, I would say. But yeah, we had to develop it. So it's like, what are you sitting here complaining about on the internet about how women are all this way and women are blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And same for women. What are you doing complaining about men when you just go around being a loudmouth and not feminine and not like a pleasant person to be around?
I mean, to your point of like putting in the work, it's so crazy to me that I've got tons of like guy friends who, when I ask them like, hey, like, what are you looking for in a woman? You're like, oh, I want someone who takes care of themselves. I want someone who is, ambitious. I want someone who has standards. And I look at them, I'm like, bro, you don't got none of that. Yeah.
Right. You ain't got any of that.
Right. So yeah, I think it takes effort, on both sides for sure. But again, we're men, so it's easier for me to see. I think there's a lot of guys out there who don't have, real expectations for sure when it comes to dating.
Don't have real
expectations. Yeah. Again, they expect to find the perfect person and someone who is of high character, but they're not willing to become that person themselves.
Yeah, definitely. So like, and I think that also goes back to, you mentioned something in there about, back in the day, if you didn't find the woman in your community, you were fucked.
Right.
Now we have all of this access. We have the most access to community we've ever had, and does it feel like to you that people just aren't pursuing it properly, or do you think that we don't have? It's tricky because it's like St. Louis. I don't know. Do you think you can find community in St. Louis? Like it's like you said, what we're doing, we are like bringing people together with Parium, and like the next event that we're hosting is going to be a sick Valentine's Day event.
Right. Are you saying because we have so many options, it's harder to find someone or develop a real connection just because like, you're able to, if this thing isn't working out, you're able to sort of move on to the next? Is that kind of what you're asking?
I think people are comfortable and they don't even want to see that the community is right in front of them if they so choose.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Man, I don't know. Like, I'm biased. I think people want in-person experiences. But again, it goes back to the marketing problem. Like, you have to let them know that, like, you don't need to be on these dating apps or Instagram or whatever. Like, you can go out and, like, to one of our, Parium events and, like, actually meet people. So, yeah, I would say it's, marketing problem.
What do you think about, like, online communities? Like, I grew up playing video games, and I built a community on there. It's funny that there's a theme in the life of like building community, even no matter what avenue it's through. But I would build a community like on video games, and we would get together and play with these people in Canada and Ireland and all over the world. Like, do you think that those communities are equally as strong as like a real life community?
Oh, 100%. I work for the founder of Reddit, which is, the biggest online community like in the world.
That's right.
Yeah. So, in many ways you can be more connected, and something Alexa says all the time is you can be more connected to, Fluffy Bunny 123 on Reddit than you are to like your actually friends and family, right? Because you can optimize for, people who have, the same values and the same interests and, all that. So yeah, you can definitely build community online. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't a place in your life for the the in-person experiences.
Totally. Yeah. I wonder what that, in some cases you said stronger, and I agree with you. Like, there's something about the anonymity of it. Like, you can open up to people. Well, it's a fine. Being anonymous is a fine line of becoming like this dark, hateful person, and also being able to express yourself and open up in ways that you never would have been able to.
Right.
It's the fact that in asking that question or speaking about that, I forgot that you had been part of Reddit, which is so funny. Like, that's so you have a unique experience on that. How would you go about building a community? What's like the way? Like, we talked about the practical things of bringing people together, but what kind of conversations needs to be going on there? What kind of values need to be instilled in people?
Yeah, I think being intentional with your goal, like you gotta get people to buy in. You gotta, something that we do with our Parium events is Benjamin, who's a mutual friend of ours. I think he does a great job of this, but he expresses to all the people attending the events like why we're doing this, and I think that's so important because it allows the people who are attending the event to feel like they're a part of something, right? Something greater than themselves, and I don't know why, but people love being a part of like great things.
Yeah.
And I think if you empower people to not only belong to a community, but to feel like they have ownership over that, I think that's one of the biggest force multipliers in building a great community.
That's right. Dude, so at the beginning of our event, or not, maybe at the end of our events, when Benjamin gets up and does his speech, he asks everyone in the crowd.
Oh
like,
my
hey,
God, no one. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Does anyone,
no one knows.
He's like, hey, does anyone here know XYZ? I'm like, who the fuck is this guy? He's gonna be so mad at me that I don't even know it now. I guess I should, but and I'm like, you're thinking. I know you're laughing.
Yeah. That's the one part. That Benjamin, I love you. That's the one part of the speech you gotta omit, man. No one knows who the guy is.
No one in the crowd. They're like, fuck no, I don't know who that is.
You get no hands, like it's every time too. Oh my gosh.
Oh, but so for a little context, like when we host these events, so one of us gets up, and it's been Benjamin for the most part. That gets up at the end of it and does his spiel of like, does anyone know blah blah blah? This is why we're doing what we're doing. Thanks for coming here. What would your speech be?
My speech?
Yeah, I'm putting you on the fucking spot right now.
Oh man. I think it'd be something along the lines of kind of what I was saying before, like empowering people, like letting them know that like, hey, you are a part of something bigger than yourselves. I would try to give people the same feeling I got, attending the first Parium meeting, where it's like, oh, this is a place where I can, build my community, and I want to raise a family here. And yeah, I'd rally the troops, honestly. Like that'd be my speech. So some Sparta, some speech, man, to get people to, burn the ships, man, and die on their shields. So
yeah, I think about die on the shields. That's right. You get people riled up.
Mm-hmm.
I think about what I would say. It's like yeah, I would probably want to hype people up to some way too, but we are the change that we wish to see in the world. Some bullshit cliche.
Yeah, some shit like that. So besides like our events and the podcast you're doing, what are some other things you think we can do, like as a group to get people to buy into St. Louis?
I think when we think about the marketing thing, we're tying everything in. It's kind of a cool conversation because all the threads are getting pushed together. But I think we should start a dating scene here in St. Louis of some sort. Like, this is what you're going to do to get people to stay in St. Louis. This is what you're going to get someone from California to move to St. Louis as they have a wife here that they're in love with or whatever. So figuring out how to cultivate a dating market, I think, would be the most bang for our buck we could possibly do.
Okay, that makes sense. I was so for context, the next event we're going to have is like the Valentine's Day event.
Yeah.
And I was so curious like why you guys decided to do that. But yeah, I think that makes sense. So how do we go about doing that? Is it just like throwing events? Is it like
events? I think are the start. Like the event that we're going to throw is going to be kick ass. I think events are great because we've had a bunch of people meet up because of those outside of the events, which is great, which is awesome.
Shout out Colton.
Shout out Colton. Yeah. Well, actually, yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Now I'll take credit for the
beginning, but the actual like coming about was
it was him. It was him at the event. Yeah, for sure. And it was the event that our event was kick ass.
Our event was so killer. If other Parium guys are listening to this, I challenge you to throw a better event that me and Jack had.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. You haven't hit
objectively, it was the best event.
Yeah,
so far.
No doubt. You haven't touched our event yet, but what were we talking about? Oh, how do we keep doing it? Like throwing events and stuff? I think events are huge. Like, do people need to be able to have a reason to go out? And especially, I think dressing up is a huge part of it.
Oh, yeah. Say more about that.
We have people, when they come to our events, we have them dress up in suit and ties. Jake looks super cute in his suit and tie.
Jake does look pretty cute.
But and then the ladies dress up in heels and dresses, and like it's we're going out, we're doing something special here, and I think it adds so much to that of like, okay, this is an event that I can just RSVP for and maybe like not show up. We're young people getting together and doing a thing. It's all part of the experience. It's all, and we're going to do something, and we want to look as good as we can for the other people that we're going to be around, for ourselves. Yeah, so it's important. It's really important. But got lost in my fucking head there. What I like about this podcast is I do feel comfortable enough to just be able to fucking ramble and say shit and lose track of things, and I think we'll figure out a way to get back to the conversation in some way.
That's my favorite thing about like long form podcasts. It's so real.
Exactly.
It's so real.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's I'm gonna fucking do a quick ad break here. And that's the other thing about podcasts too is you're allowing people to know you. People want to work with who they know. And this is what else, you're not going to get people to know you in a minute clip, right? You're going to get them to know you when you have a conversation with someone sitting across from you for an hour, 2 hours long. But back to your question, how do we do that? Throwing events. I think, and we have a bunch of people that are in the software space in our group. I think we could build an app of some sort that cultivates it. I don't know what that would look like, but what do you think that we should be doing if the goal was make a dating scene in St. Louis that is worth being a part of?
Yeah. I wouldn't actually say like the dating app would be the way to go. I think the benefit we would have is we would be able to curate these like in-person experiences, and that's something that like, Hinge or Tinder won't be able to compete with us with. So I think that would be the way to go.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Like what are the events and the experiences that we can create that optimize for serendipity and organic connection?
That's right.
Yeah. Whatever.
I also now I'm thinking that there are tiers to this too, right? Because there's like the Chad frat guy. I don't think most frat guys are Chads, by the way. just shoot on, throw a little shade. But the Chad quote cliche frat guy. Like I think there needs to be levels to it too, because we can't just be optimizing for people like us, because there are all different kinds of people and cultures out there. So how do we expand across the cultures and across the different types of people? Because are our events sufficient in that? Or
that's a interesting question. Kind of just thinking out loud here. Would the answer be to empower the people to start and build their own communities?
Yeah. So okay, that's interesting. Yeah. So maybe going out and finding the leader and finding the person in each community that's going to do that, and so it takes like a keen eye on our part to identify that person.
Right.
And then empower them to do that.
Yeah, because I know, like, both of us are involved in, multiple communities here in St. Louis, and I think there's a space for all of those, communities to win. So, yeah, maybe it's empowering people to create their own networks of, in-person experiences and, finding some sort of way to connect all those nodes. And, I think it'd be pretty cool.
That's right, because Mark's got Omen Coffee, obviously. I'll probably have him on as the next guest. But Mark has Omen Coffee, and so, like, that's, like, the Christian community. So now, okay, he's taking care of that section of it, right? Like, if you're a Christian in St. Louis, you want to go to Omen right now. I'll tell you what, there's some horny bastards up in that Bible study. Man, there's like 200 young cats there.
What's Parium's like niche?
It's a great question. I don't know. What would you say?
I don't know either. You said something about Omen. I'm like, damn, I don't really know if we have like a niche. I would say like we like tend to be like younger, like early 20s, mid 20s. Yeah, I don't know. That's the only thing.
I think like independent thinkers is like what I would put it as, really, because you look at these different things and types of places, and like the independent thinking is not very prevalent, and like it seems like when we talk about when we talk about agency,
yeah,
that is something that's an independent thinker for sure, right?
You also mentioned not to cut you off,
please.
You also mentioned like with the Parium events we do, like we try to dress up and do like bespoke, elegant events. Like maybe it's like that's what we're all also optimizing for. It's like the people who like that type of stuff.
Elegance and agency.
Yeah, elegance and agency. That's beautiful.
Oh, okay. I like that.
Beauty can be another one.
Beauty. We're beautiful. That's so we mentioned the Christian community. Like, what are your I always love to go here. But what are your thoughts on religion, organized religion, belief in a higher power? Are you, and I bring this up specifically because you are so much of a go-getter and so much of an independent, I'll just go out and do this myself kind of thing. How do you look at spirituality and organized religion?
Yeah, a lot of it I'm ignorant to. I wasn't, raised religious at all. I think, talking to people who, are religious, I think there's a lot of principles and frameworks that I take from it that, allow me to achieve the outcomes I want to achieve. But I haven't necessarily been on board to any religion at this point.
Could you? So are you saying you could to some degree, or do you think you could?
I mean, I'm leaving room to have like my mind changed, but I think like as of right now, I haven't found something that really resonated with me.
Yeah, totally.
Okay, how about I take over the hosting duties? Let me ask you a couple questions.
Okay.
All right. Obviously, we said this at the beginning of the podcast, but you're someone that I have a tremendous amount of respect towards, and there's a lot of things like I take from you. What is like one thing you would tell someone who's 18 years old, who wants to, create their own security and maybe start a business or, find some goal that they can pursue, or maybe, essentially live a life that they can look back on, when they're 80 and be proud of? What would you tell that 18-year-old guy to do?
That's a great question. I'm gonna throw this back to you after I answer. But I would probably tell them, if you want results that are greater than what everyone else's is, why are you going through the exact same steps that everyone else is going through? Like that would be my first question.
Oh, so you encourage them to like march to the beat of their own drum?
March to your beat of your own drum, but I wouldn't do that by telling them, you should be doing this. It's really, to me, especially when the mind is so plastic at 18, it's leading them there with questions. Okay, what are the results that you want? Are you taking the necessary steps to get those results in the first place, right? Like, what do those steps look like? So I wouldn't tell them necessarily, here's what you should be doing. It would be trying to develop agency in them through questioning them.
Yeah, I like that. That
What,
checks out.
what about you?
Man, I think it kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning of this podcast. You get so much credit for being like young and just having agency that I would just tell them to start now.
Yeah.
Like whatever it is, like start now. One, you get so much credit for being young and you get judged based off your potential and your room for growth rather than like your actual results. And then two, this is probably the cheapest your overhead will ever be, right? I mean, you've got like nothing to lose, like literally nothing to lose. You're most likely going to fail at the first a couple things you try. So you might as well do it now where you have nothing to lose before you have like, a family. So yeah, I would say get started now. And then I would also say, and this is such a cliche, but I don't think people take it like literally. It's like be extremely greedy with like who gets your time. And like the cliche is like you are who the five most people you like spend time with or whatever like that. But I don't think people will take that as literally as they should be. I think you should operate under the assumption that the people you spend your time with are the only factors to achieving whatever outcome, you want to achieve. And I think if you operate under those assumptions, you will be like much better off. So get started now. Focus on, the people you spend time with. And then if I had to like throw one more thing in there, I would say like be like obsessed with something. I think one, your life will just be dramatically better because you'll wake up and actually have something that you actually care about doing. You're going to be willing to work like long hours over a long period of time because like you're doing something you're interested in. And then I think experience I've had, so far is, again, like I'm fairly early in my career, but because I obsess over, sort of AI and automation, there are millions of people who have not given it the level of thought that I have that there's a market for my services. And yeah, I think if you're willing to obsess over something and consume a shit ton of content, over 6 months to a year, you'll be at a level where you'll be able to be valuable to somebody.
That's amazing. Yeah, it's the five people. I hear people all the time where they're like, oh, I hear that quote. That's so true, man. So then you don't change anyone that you're spending time around. The people you're spending time around are bums, bro. But you mentioned in there, right, the being willing to take time and research on things and like hours and hours and hours of things.
Yeah.
We were talking about this, I don't know, 2 nights ago, I want to say. Like, do we need to be working 10 hours a week or 10 hours a day, 12 hours a day, 14 hours a day? Or is it, can you be working on the right things? Can you describe like what you kind of meant when you said that?
Yeah. I think it's probably more important to spend time on the right thing, not necessarily like spending time at all. And when people talk about like how much you should work, I think that's like a great metric to track, but it shouldn't be the most important metric. I think results are the most important metric. Like, again, like if you're going to buy a product in the store, I mean, do you really care like how much like the person like spent like on building the product? You just care if like the product works. So I say all that to say that you should optimize for doing the right thing with your time, not necessarily working hard. But with saying that, I do think working hard is important. I just don't think it's the most important thing.
Yeah, I like that a lot. I think a lot of business owners or people that want to start businesses are like, well, look at all the bells and whistles that I put on this. Like, this is why people should be buying it. They start, like we've talked about a lot, they start with a solution in mind first and then work towards trying to find the problem?
Oh my God, that is the most important thing I learned from working with Alexis. And he made business so simple. Business is extremely difficult. Don't get me wrong, but it's extremely simple. It's at the end of the day, you are building a product or service that someone else is willing to buy, and like that's it. But because business is so difficult and arbitrary and more of an art than a science, people focus on like process and values and all the fluff that again don't necessarily contribute to any value that you're providing to somebody. And I got like front row seat to some of like the most brilliant people focus on the things that have nothing to do with like the customer experience. So to give you all like a real example, we ended up giving a couple $1 million to this guy to start a company, and he was building a mobile app to it's essentially like a LinkedIn clone but better for some reason. um, and he spent the whole entire time we had with him talking about the algorithm he had for the app and his hiring process and the frameworks he's put in place to raise money and build apps and like all this stuff. And then you actually log on to the app, and after you fill out the form, there was like no, I can't remember if there wasn't a button to actually get into the app, or it wasn't clear how you like move on from the form. But it's again, it's he was focused like on the wrong thing, and most people would download the app, fill out the form, realize they couldn't get in the app, and just delete it. And again, you have like some of the smartest people like miss the simplest thing, which is like your goal should be providing value to the customer. And something that Alexis said over and over and over again is you should be focusing on building product and talking to your customers, and that's it. That's where you should spend like most of your time doing. And yeah, you'd be surprised about how many businesses like don't actually do this. He used to always say like most businesses hate their customers, and it's an extreme example, but it really like drives home like how important it is to focus on like the user experience, and how many companies like are dropping the ball on this.
That's very interesting. I love that. He seems like someone that's very insightful, even outside of business, like someone that reflects on things.
Yeah, he's a dog. He's a G.
Yeah, that's right. What else you got? What else? You flipped the crime. I like when you ask questions because then I can just ask you right back.
Oh yeah. Oh hell yeah, man.
Let's make this about me.
Man, you touched on romantic partners earlier. What are you doing to because I know having a family is important to you. What are you doing to find like the right person for you?
I was telling Jake about this. Up until recently, I honestly thought that I was just like being too neurotic and too nervous and too cowardice about going out and finding the right people. But honestly, a recent realization is like I just wasn't interested in the women that I was seeing, like and once I see a woman that I'm interested in, like I'll pursue pretty directly and right on. So what I'm doing, I'm going out to things that people are putting on. We're hosting our own events, like we're cultivating this own space. But if someone has any little event, a pickleball event going on or whatever, just show up and go to it, and then be myself and be pleasant to be around. It's not hard and it's not complex. Go to things.
Yeah.
Go to things. Like it's so simple. But what about you?
Oh man, I'm still figuring it out. There are times where I'm more proactive, and times that I'm less proactive as well. I like what you said, where it's like you're optimizing for just like those sort of organic experiences. I think that's a right way to go about it. I think a lot of people who are listening to this who are like us, who are go-getters and have big dreams and aspirations, we spend so much time like in our office or on our computers that we miss a lot of these experiences. So yeah, to find ways where you can optimize for both, where something we've been trying to do is like getting work done at a coffee shop or at a bar, or just going out, right, and not being stuck in the office. So I like that, but I say all that to say that I am still figuring it out.
Okay, I actually really like this now. So let's if we could put out steps, because this is something that we've been working on and talking about a lot. Steps along the way to like find in.
Two single guys talking about how to find a
yeah,
partner.
I was about to.
Oh my god! Have you seen the meme where it's essentially like you have someone like they're like a director or the head of like health and fitness, and like they're the most like unhealthy person you've ever seen. Yeah. That's right now.
Okay, I should I should reframe it as what are the steps that we're taking to go about it, and then maybe people can take out what they want from that of like, okay, that seems like
Yeah. That's a better framing. It's like we've had a lot of failures and successes with going out
Totally.
and like trying these like different techniques. Like what have like worked for us?
Yeah,
Yeah,
because I feel like step one would be optimize yourself, become the best possible human being you can be, which is like such a bullshit. People are gonna hear that and be like, fuck that, whatever. And then I think step two is what we're doing. Like you and I we're both entrepreneurs, and so we'll be working till 10, 11 p.m. most nights, and like you're saying, we get in the habit of just sitting in our office and doing it there. But now we're going to Sasha's, most nights, or Wash U Library, where there's a bunch of young, intelligent people.
Yeah.
So like we're
Shout
going
out
to the right.
Sasha's, man. They need to get some Wi-Fi.
They need to get some damn Wi-Fi.
You should clip this part, and we need to find the guy who owns Sasha's. And
Deal. Yeah, that absolutely. Because I mean, hey, we're a couple of handsome young guys. You want us in your place, like at night.
More importantly, if you had Wi-Fi there, we would be spending more money than you would be paying for your Wi-Fi bill. So just pragmatically,
100%. That's a great point. But what are some other steps that you're taking? Because you said you're still figuring it out, but
yeah. So to go back to your thing, like the step-by-step guide. Yeah, I think you're right on the first two steps. Like step one, like you should probably become the person you want to attract. I think that's like a great like first step. And then it's optimizing for those sort of organic experiences. And I would probably say it's like step two, which what we're doing right now. And then, man, this is gonna be a spicy take.
Yes.
Oh man, I don't even know if I should say it, man. I don't even know if I want to say it, but fuck it. I think the problem that most men have is they do not have standards and they're not like qualifying women. So I think that's like the next step is like
once you've become the person that you're trying to
once you become the person you want to attract, and then you're in the space where you can sort of you're I don't know, organically come across the women. Step three is like being discerning enough to having like standards, and I think a lot of men like lack that.
Yeah, and I don't think that is spicy. It's you're trying to become the man the type of person that you want to attract. And then once you are that person, don't filter out anyone that isn't the type of person that you want to attract, that
Right.
you set out to be, right? Speaking of setting out and being the type of person you want to be, so how did we didn't even go into like how you decided to start getting your pilot's license.
I don't think we did. No,
yeah, because when I introduced you, I'm like, Isaiah's like the person that's like, oh, I think I want to do that. And then 2 weeks later, he's just done it. This is one of those things. You're like, you're flying through pilot school.
Hell yeah, man.
Sick freaking pun. I'm gonna Jake. Make
Oh,
sure
okay.
you mark
I
that.
didn't even pick that up. Yes. Okay. There you
Mark
go.
that down, Jake.
Yeah, 1 point for Jack.
Jake's not a morning person, but okay, yeah. So tell me about this. Tell me about everything.
Yeah, so I described to you all the story of the Spirit of St. Louis, and I think I mentioned that like I was completely ignorant to this whole entire story, and the only reason why I know about this story was the grandson of Charles Lindbergh, who was the first person to fly nonstop solo flight across the Atlantic. The grandson is this guy named Eric Lindbergh, and he runs this foundation called the Lindbergh Foundation, and their goal is to invest in companies that are leading in innovation in technology and science. And a mutual friend of ours, Benjamin, who we mentioned a couple times, he was a small part of actually getting Eric to move the foundation back into St. Louis. Actually, I don't even know if it was ever in St. Louis. And anyways, they had an event for this, and Benjamin invited me along, and I got to meet Eric, and he described to me sort of the rich history that St. Louis has with aviation. And that inspired me to want to get involved. And I went on a discovery flight where you basically just, pay like $100 or so, and you get up in, one of these smaller planes that are behind us, and you just get up in the air. And Jack, it was the most freeing thing like in the world. The best way for me to describe it is if you guys can remember the first time you got your driver's license, it's that, but every time you get up in the air. It's awesome.
Every time
you get up in there.
Yeah, because you've described it as true freedom, right?
It's true freedom.
What makes it true freedom?
Man, I think in transportation, like there's so many constraints that we have that we don't even like realize. It's like we are subjected to like the flows of traffic, right? There are tons of laws that we need to abide by. If I want to drive from here to, O'Fallon, Missouri, which is like, 20 miles and where I'm from, I can't just go in a straight line, right? I need to take certain roads that have been paved out. I need to follow traffic lights and stop signs, and I am just getting pushed around from like the flow of traffic. There's like so much constraint. But when you're up in the air, you can go wherever you want, man. You can go like left, right, up, down. You're free. And in many ways, like getting your driver's license unlocks a level of freedom where you can essentially, go anywhere. Um, you know, Flying a plane takes that to the next level where you're not constrained to not being able to go to to California, either on someone else's plane, buying like a plane ticket and going through TSA, or even driving there yourself, right? You have the the agency and the ability to just fly whenever you want, when you want. And yeah, you can get there much faster than driving. So I mean, it's awesome. I can talk about it all day.
I can tell. That's awesome.
Yeah.
It's if life is a video game, you've unlocked the next level.
Yeah, it's like having like God mode or something. Like, you know what I mean? You get such like a unique perspective of the city too. I think that's another thing that people don't realize is when you think about like the city you live in or just life in general, you are thinking about it through your eyes, which is like mostly like on the ground. But when you get up in the air, it's like such like a unique perspective. Like you realize that like you were just like one small piece of like this machine we call like a city, and that changes your perspective, I think.
How so?
Yeah, it makes you feel like that. And I don't want to say like your life doesn't matter, but I think there are times, a lot of times where, we talked about risk earlier, where we just think it's like the decisions we make are such a big deal. And then when you're up in the air and you get to see like the city from like, 50,000 feet in the air, it's more like 3,000. But yeah, you just get to see like you are a small part of this big thing that is a city, which is a small part of a big thing called a state, which is like a small part of a big thing called a country. And again, it just goes out and out and out. And then you realize like the decisions that you make day by day don't really affect anything like, at all, and allows you to be more free as far as your decision making.
I struggle with that reasoning. I get what you're saying because at the same time, every little decision you make matters completely. It's like there's this weird
Yeah, it depends like what you mean like
dichotomy.
by like matter, like
right. So when you say matter, what do you mean by that?
yeah, like so to we were just talking about romantic partners. It's like maybe when you are about to approach a girl, right? You have these thoughts going in your head. It's like, what if she rejects me? What if she does like all this stuff? And I think what I mean by like it doesn't matter, it's like literally like the sun will wake up tomorrow. Like things will be fine. You are most likely like never gonna see this girl again. And that's not necessarily like what's running through our minds like when we're in the actual moment. So
Right.
if you're able to like zoom out a little bit, like you sort of realize that like it doesn't matter in the sense that this interaction, these decisions that you're making, not all of them, but like majority of the ones like we make, you won't necessarily feel the effects of them like ever.
Yeah, I completely agree. Well, it's funny because like you go approaching a girl, whatever, and your heart's racing and you're scared. Like your evolutionary biology is telling you you're gonna fucking die. You might die in this situation, which is so obviously it's
Right.
not, but it is reasonably scary because it's like essentially what she's telling our monkey brains is if she denies you is I don't want to repopulate. I don't want to reproduce with you. You aren't worth
Man.
being a person to reproduce with.
So this is an assumption, but I feel like it makes sense. Like, do you think that's because like we evolved in like living in like a tribe and a community? So if you like fucked up with this one girl, it's like that's like one out of the 12 girls you can even possibly like mate with, right? Does that check out to you, or am I making this up?
That sounds about right.
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds
Yeah,
right.
and I think when you're in a plane, like you get up in there, and it's the same feeling we had in Chicago. Were we in the Sears building?
We were not in the Sears building. We were in
Hancock?
Like, the Hancock building.
Hancock building. We're in the Hancock building. It's the same thing as like getting out of the plane. You just realize like how much is out there, and I think that like reprograms your brain to think like most things. Not all things, but a lot of things are abundant as far as like, and another thing that's abundant too is like your decisions. Like you're gonna have like a million fucking decisions in life.
That's great. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's right. There's a stoic principle that is I think Marcus Aurelius talks about it in his meditations of like, okay, zoom out until you're envisioning yourself, right? You zoom out above your head and you're going out and you're looking down on yourself, out until like you're the size of an ant, and then you realize. Like you're saying, oh, these little things that I get frustrated about or whatever. Look how silly like that's just silly. Like imagine an ant like calling his boss and being like, "Hey, fuck you, you've been an asshole to me," or whatever it is. It's just silly, right? Or you zoom out and like the thing that we're heightened, our frustration is hyper heightened in traffic, for instance. If someone cuts you off for some reason, you get way angrier than you would if you were just walking but like zoom out of that. and look at these cars to where they're the size of ants, and like what happened? You just saw one little ant move slightly faster in front of the other little ant,
Yeah.
and it's nothing. But so you mentioned something in there. I'm curious what your thoughts are. There are these concepts. There's the concept of nihilism, nothing matters, why try? And then there's the concept of absurdism, nothing matters, might as well try.
Yeah, I think that's the better way to look at it. It's like nothing matters, you might as well try. Nothing matters, why try.
Yeah,
Sure.
that might be the title of this episode. Nothing matters, might as well try.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, what did we miss? What should we have talked about that we didn't talk about?
Oh man. Oh man, you know what? Something I think I'm pretty passionate about, or at least interested in, that I think you might have some unique thoughts on. Um, First off, do you think men should dress better, start wearing like suits and ties and stuff?
Absolutely.
And okay, so if so, how do we do that?
We should start putting on like styling events. Try to get 50 or 100 guys in there, and then have someone that we know that's an expert in style to like show up and present to them. That's like the
Yeah.
most practical way, I think.
Yeah, okay, I like that. Maybe we should like set like a standard for like the Parium guys. It's like, hey, if you're showing, and again, this is not like the fucking gym or anything, but like if you're showing up to like sausages or something, like you got to wear like a jacket or something.
Oh, I like that. Okay,
Yeah,
cool.
okay.
I'm down for that.
Cool. All right.
All right. So my last question. So the question that I have asked each of my guests, the last question is, what is the most important thing that someone should be paying attention to? So first, I'll ask you to respond to Benjamin's answer, which was he thinks that people should be paying attention to things less, stop focusing on all of these distractions, and start paving your own path and not worrying about all of these things. The answers aren't going to come from outside.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're going to come from within. How does that speak to you?
Yeah, that resonates with me. How I would sort of internalize that is, yeah, there's a lot of social pressure to think one thing, act in one way, and you need to find out, what matters to you in life, what you're willing to dedicate, your life to. So I think Benjamin's 100% right on that.
Okay, and then what do you think that is the most important thing that people should be paying attention to?
Oh man. I am of the belief that, and I'm obviously biased because I have an AI company, that in our lifetimes, artificial intelligence is going to replace a lot of the jobs that give people meaning, and I think people need to discover like what truly makes them happy. And I think we're going to live in a world one day where if you don't want to work, you're not going to have to work. And unfortunately, a lot of people get like their sense of self-purpose, through their job. So if you are someone who either is not going to work because they don't have to, or not necessarily has the skills that the market needs, I think you need to have the ability to find purpose in some life. So yeah, that's like the challenge I would give for people is find something that you actually care about, not something that society tells you, oh, this is a great job, or you should be reading this. And so it's kind of what Benjamin says, like you need to find like your own truth and like your own sort of mission in life.
Hell yeah, awesome. Izayah Hudnut, thanks for fucking coming
I appreciate
on,
having
man.
me, Jack.
It was cool.